For 19 years, they were the heartbeat of Hollywood. Two souls who turned love into legend. Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban weren't just a couple. They were living proof that fame could coexist with faith. That devotion could outlast applause. On red carpets, they moved like poetry. Her hand resting gently on his arm. His gaze fixed on her as if she were his only horizon. To millions, they were perfection. To each other, they were home. But even the most beautiful fairy tales cast shadows. Behind the flash of cameras, something fragile began to crack. Each photograph hid a silence. Each award night carried an invisible distance. The world saw the beauty, only they felt the fracture. When news broke that they were ending their 19-year marriage, it felt like the curtain had fallen on Hollywood's last true love story. Fans wept, journalists searched for reasons. But the truth was more human than scandal. It was heartbreak wrapped in grace. At 57, Keith Urban finally spoke. His words weren't a confession but a reflection, calm, stripped of glamour. He said that love, no matter how deep, can lose its rhythm. When life plays too loudly, that even devotion can fade. If it isn't tended like a fragile flame. He didn't blame her, nor himself. He spoke like a man who had lived long enough to understand that sometimes the greatest tragedy in love isn't betrayal, but time, the slow kind that erodes closeness. Not with storms, but with silence. And so, the golden couple faded. Not in anger, but in acceptance. Their ending wasn't a burst of stars, but the quiet dimming of a light that once held the world's gaze. Because even the brightest constellations eventually burn out, leaving behind not darkness, but memory. Long before their names were etched into Hollywood's silver air. Before the glitter and the applause. There were two lonely children under the same wide southern sky. Different cities, different childhoods. But the same yearning to be seen, to be loved, to belong. Keith Lionel Urban was born in Wangray, New Zealand, and raised in Caboolture, a small working-class town in Queensland, Australia. His father sold convenience goods and played country records on weekends. His mother, a quiet but steadfast woman, held the family together through long silences and longer debts. Keith, the younger son, was soft-spoken, sensitive, drawn endlessly to the sound of guitar strings. At night, when his parents argued behind thin walls, he pressed his ear to the instrument and played until the noise disappeared. "The music saved me," he'd say years later, "because it gave me something I could control." He grew up barefoot, his fingers bleeding from steel strings, his dreams stretching far beyond the dusty fields of Caboolture. Nicole Mary Kidman's world looked different from the outside, but carried its own storms within. Born in Honolulu while her Australian parents studied abroad. Her father, Anthony, was a psychologist. Her mother, Yanelle, a nurse and activist. Their home overflowed with books and ideals. But Nicole's world was inward, a realm of imagination and daydreams. Tall, pale, and shy, she felt everything too deeply. Other children teased her for her height and porcelain skin. So she hid inside stories, finding safety in characters who could say the things she never dared to. Acting wasn't vanity, it was survival. Each role gave her a voice. Each stage a brief escape from the ache of being misunderstood. Both grew up chasing something they couldn't name. For Keith, it was freedom through music. For Nicole, it was truth through emotion. And though they didn't know it, that same endless southern sky watched over them both. Two souls destined to collide decades later, when the timing and the wounds were right. By the early 2000s, Nicole had already walked through fire. Her marriage to Tom Cruise had ended in heartbreak and scrutiny. "I was broken," she once said. "I didn't know how to be alone." Hollywood adored her, but her world felt hollow. She longed for something pure, something real. Keith was walking his own tightrope. After years grinding through the country music circuit, he was finally rising in Nashville. But success brought shadows. A battle with alcohol and cocaine. A blurred line between triumph and self-destruction. He was adored on stage and empty off it. The applause unable to quiet the ache of his own demons. Then came the night that changed everything. January 15, 2005, the G-Day USA Gala in Los Angeles. A celebration of Australian talent abroad. She was there as the nation's cinematic queen. He, its musical son. Their first conversation was brief, hesitant. But the air around them seemed to still. Nicole would later say, "I felt it instantly. Something familiar, something safe." But Keith, shy and cautious, didn't act. Months passed. "I guess he's not interested," as she half-laughed to friends. Then came her 38th birthday. Early morning in New York, the city still asleep. The doorbell rang. Nicole opened the door to find Keith standing there, holding a small bouquet of white gardenias, her favorite. His voice was soft, a happy birthday. No fanfare, no grand gesture, just sincerity. And that was enough. "I knew I was gone," she said later. From that moment, their lives began to move in rhythm. Their conversations were long and honest, filled with laughter and confessions. She told him she'd stopped believing in forever. He told her he was still trying to believe in himself. They spoke not as stars, but as survivors. Their first kiss wasn't cinematic, it was quiet, trembling with truth. They didn't fall in love fast. They grew into it, like two trees intertwining after years of standing alone. By year's end, the press had caught on. They tried to keep it private. But love that real can't stay hidden for long. On stage, Keith's voice softened when he sang of a heart worth fighting for. In interviews, Nicole smiled again. The kind of smile that looked unpracticed, almost surprised. For two people who'd spent their lives performing, it was the first time they felt real. Their love story wasn't written in diamonds or fame. It was written in mornings like that one in New York. In small acts of devotion. In the miracle of two people who'd known pain yet chose to try again. And somewhere above that same sudden sky, that once watched two lonely children, the stars must have smiled. Because destiny had finally kept its promise. Their wedding wasn't a Hollywood spectacle, but a whisper of faith. On the evening of June 25, 2006. Inside the softly lit St. Patrick's Estate Church in Sydney. Candles flickered like 1,000 heartbeats. The air was heavy with jasmine. Violins trembled in the rafters. And every vow felt like a prayer. Nicole, radiant in lace and grace, walked toward Keith, who stood trembling. Not from nerves, but from gratitude. After decades of searching, he had finally found a place where his soul could rest. They didn't promise perfection, they promised presence. When he slipped the ring on her finger, he whispered words only she could hear. "I'll never let the silence win again." And she smiled, because she understood exactly what he meant. Both had lived through silences that could swallow a person whole. Their ceremony was modest but full of laughter. Then they vanished from Hollywood's noise and reappeared in the quiet rhythm of everyday life. Barefoot mornings, guitar songs, shared peace. Nicole finally found comfort in being ordinary. Keith, newly sober, found solace in her presence. In the woman who listened when words failed. Only a few months after the wedding, the darkness returned. Keith's old demons, alcohol, cocaine, and self-doubt, came back like ghosts that never truly die. In October 2006, 4 months after their vows, he checked himself into rehab. Headlines exploded, and Nicole Kidman's new husband in rehab. Paparazzi surrounded the gates. Whispers spread that the fairy tale had ended before it began. But Nicole didn't flinch. She didn't run. She said nothing to the press, and little to friends. Behind closed doors, she called him every day, sending letters that began with a "Remember who you are." He read them in the sterile silence of the treatment center, his hands trembling, tears blurring the ink. Later he would say, "As she saved my life." When he finally left rehab, thinner but chloride, Nicole was waiting at the airport. No cameras, no spectacle, just her hand reaching for his. "Let's go home," she said. That moment made him believe redemption wasn't just a word, it was a person. They rebuilt slowly. Keith began writing again, songs stitched with gratitude and vulnerability. Nicole found courage in smaller, deeper films, stories about pain and resilience rather than perfection. Rabbit Hole, Australia, 9. Each role seemed to echo her own rebirth. In 2008, their first daughter, Sunday Rose, was born. Nicole, then 41, glowed with awe. "I feel like I've been given a second childhood," as she said. Keith wrote Sweet Thing that same year, a song overflowing with joy after darkness. Every chord carried traces of her laughter and the tiny heartbeat of their newborn. 2 years later, in 2010, their second daughter arrived, Faith Margaret, born via surrogate. Nicole called her the greatest gift of trust. Her name was symbolic, Faith for belief, Margaret for the grandmother who once told her, "Love's truest test is endurance." For a while, life moved to a gentle rhythm. Mornings began with sunlight spilling through their Nashville home. Keith strummed his guitar while the girls danced in pajamas. Evenings ended quietly, her scripts scattered across the couch, his lyrics half-written by the lamp. They had survived addiction, distance, and scrutiny. Love, it seemed, had triumphed. Nicole once said in an interview, "I married a man who doesn't run from storms, he faces them." Keith told a concert crowd, "She's the reason I'm alive and sober. Every song I play is a thank you." Yet within that triumph lived a warning. When two souls rise together from the ashes, they sometimes forget the fire is still burning underneath. For the world, the next decade looked like an endless dream. On red carpets they glided side by side, two halves of a living myth. Reporters called them the Southern Royals of Hollywood. Magazines printed their photos like portraits. Her hand resting on his chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her. The world saw devotion, glamour, grace. But beneath the flashbulbs, they were learning that light can blind as easily as it can illuminate. Nicole's star soared higher than ever. After Rabbit Hole came Stoker, Lion, Big Little Lies, and Being the Ricardos. Each role peeled away another layer, revealing pain, resilience, and womanhood in its rawest form. Critics called her fearless. But that fearlessness had a cost. Every film took her far from home, to London, Morocco, Los Angeles, each character demanding pieces of her heart, leaving less of it waiting at home. Meanwhile, Keith ruled his own kingdom. His songs topped charts. His guitar solos lit up stadiums from Nashville to Melbourne. Crowds roared his lyrics back at him. But when he stepped off stage, the noise couldn't fill the growing quiet that waited. He poured himself into music because he didn't know how to speak what he felt. And in his silence, Nicole learned to hide her loneliness behind elegance. They lived like travelers, crossing paths between flights, reunions full of kisses and promises, partings filled with unspoken worry. They became experts in temporary joy. Their daughters grew up among airports and hotel rooms. Their childhood measured in boarding passes and bedtime video calls. Still, the family tried to create small sanctuaries of normal life. Christmases in Sydney, summers on their Tennessee farm, birthdays with handmade cakes and out-of-tune guitars. For a time, those rituals felt like anchors. At award shows, the cameras always found them. She would whisper something. He'd laugh, his head tilting toward her like a sunflower toward light. The tenderness looked effortless, but tenderness can be rehearsed, and smiles can be learned. Behind the applause, cracks deepened. Keith began sleeping more often on tour buses than in their shared bed. Nicole spent nights alone on film sets, staring out at city lights that mocked the life she once imagined. In interviews, she called him my deep, deep love. He called her my compass. But love stretched across continents began to thin, like a string pulled too tight. There were small betrayals, not of bodies, but of time. Missed anniversaries, unanswered messages, calls delayed by hours. One evening, during a rare weekend together, she asked softly, "When was the last time we had dinner without an audience?" He smiled, but couldn't answer. Fame had been their reward, the crown for all they'd overcome. Instead, it became a third presence in their marriage, a glittering ghost that demanded constant attention. Nicole once said she could play any emotion on screen except happiness. Contentment is too still, as she joked, but privately she wondered if she had forgotten what it truly felt like. Keith tried to express his love the only way he knew, through music. Songs like The Fighter and Parallel Line carried hidden messages. Apologies, gratitude, love letters disguised as melodies. Audiences sang along, unaware they were witnessing a man begging the universe for another chance to keep what mattered most. But the distance persisted. The world that once called them a miracle couple began to whisper, "Are they drifting apart?" Neither answered. They smiled for cameras, then boarded separate flights, slept in separate beds, dreamed separate dreams. And yet, even as they unraveled, there was beauty in their endurance. They weren't enemies, they were echoes. Two souls bound by history, still reaching for each other through the noise. Their kingdom of lights still shone. But behind it, the shadows grew longer. The world saw the glow, only they felt the burn. Love rarely ends with a crash. More often it bends, frays, and forgets its rhythm long before the final note fades. For Keith and Nicole, the breaking came quietly, almost gently. There were no slammed doors, no sharp words, only absences, the kind that linger longer than presence. At first they called it a time apart. She was filming Practical Magic 2 in London. He was touring Europe with the High and Alive World Tour. They told friends that distance makes the heart grow fonder. But distance can also teach the heart how to live without. Weeks became months. He wrote her letters that sat unopened in dressing rooms. She left voicemails he never heard, drowned out by stadium roars. When they finally met again, their conversations were polite, safe, the kind you have with someone you still love but can no longer reach. Their daughters noticed first. Sunday stopped asking when Dad would be home. Faith began sleeping beside her mother, afraid of the silence down the hall. Laughter that once filled the house now echoed faintly, like an old recording played too many times. Keith started drinking again, not recklessly, but quietly. A glass of wine after shows, a little whiskey before sleep. He told himself he was in control, that he'd earned it after years of sobriety. But addiction never knocks, it slips back in through loneliness. Nicole learned of it through someone on his tour. Her heart didn't break in anger, it broke from exhaustion. "I can't save him twice," as she whispered to a friend. Still, she tried. She flew to Nashville unannounced. The reunion was tender, a long hug, tears, promises to begin again. For a brief moment, it seemed possible. They sat on the back porch at dusk, guitars and scripts beside them, watching the Tennessee sky fade to indigo. He played a new melody that trembled between apology and hope. She listened, smiling sadly. But as night deepened, the silence grew heavier than the song, the silence of two people who had run out of words. The following months brought more distance. Public appearances grew rare. When they did appear together, their smiles felt rehearsed, flawless, professional, hollow. The media called it a strain under busy schedules. Friends called it a denial. Then one morning, Nicole woke to find him gone. His note was brief: "I need time to breathe." No promise of return. No signature. Just absence. By summer 2025, whispers had turned to truth. Keith had moved into his own apartment in Nashville. The family home that once pulsed with music now stood still. Nicole, still wearing her wedding ring, tried to shield their daughters from headlines. "Your father loves you very much," as she told them. She didn't add, "He just doesn't know how to stay." On September 30th, 2025, Nicole Kidman filed for divorce after 19 years of marriage. The phrase "irreconcilable differences" appeared on paper, cold, weightless words concealing years of tears, sleepless nights, and lonely hotel rooms. To the public, it was a shock. To them, it was mercy. Keith didn't contest the filing. The separation was civil. Nicole retained custody of Sunday, now 17, and Faith, 14. Keith would see them during breaks in his tours. No alimony. No legal war. Just quiet division. Two lives split down the middle, both still bleeding. Their lawyers exchanged documents. Their daughters exchanged glances they didn't understand. That night, Nicole sat alone on the porch. The air smelled of rain. She thought of the church in Sydney where it all began, the candles, the music, the trembling vows. She wondered if love ever truly dies, or if it simply changes shape, becoming something the world no longer recognizes. Across the ocean, Keith finished the final song of his set. The crowd cheered, thousands chanting his name. But when the lights dimmed and the applause faded, he whispered into the darkness, "I'm sorry." No one heard him. The tragedy of their story wasn't that they stopped loving each other. It was that they kept loving, just in different directions. And so, the fairy tale that once inspired millions ended. Not in scandal, but in silence. Not in betrayal, but in the quiet truth that even real love is sometimes not enough to survive the noise of the world. The last candle from their Sydney wedding, that soft, flickering symbol of forever, had finally gone out. Yet even as the flame died, its warmth lingered in memory. After the papers were signed and the cameras turned away, the real story began, the one no one could photograph. It wasn't about endings. It was about what love leaves behind when it can no longer hold itself together. 4 months, Nicole Kidman disappeared from public life. She stayed in their Nashville home with the girls, declining interviews, skipping red carpets, choosing invisibility. The actress who had built her world on being seen finally allowed herself to vanish. Friends said she spent long evenings on the porch, reading old letters or just sitting in silence. She wasn't mourning love, one of them said softly. She was mourning the silence that killed it. Those closest to her knew she had been blindsided, not by the divorce itself, but by how quietly it came. Keith's decision to leave was methodical, almost kind. And that made it hurt even more. There had been no explosion, no betrayal to hate him for. Just a slow retreat, like the tide leaving the shore. Until she stood barefoot on the wet sand, unsure if the waves would ever return. It wasn't that he fell out of love, as she told a confidant. It was that he fell out of reach. Keith's truth was different, but no less painful. He had spent his whole life running from shadows. Addiction, pressure, fear of failure. And when he finally had everything, he realized he didn't know how to stand still. Music was both his anchor and his escape. "I didn't mean to leave," he confessed in one interview. "I just didn't know how to stay." That year, he wrote songs no one would ever hear. Songs about silence, distance, and the ache of watching something perfect unravel. One chorus went, "You were the calm I couldn't keep, the quiet I drowned to feel complete." He never named her. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. For Nicole, healing came slower, quieter. She never blamed him publicly. In her rare interviews, she chose honesty over bitterness. "Love doesn't end because it's broken," as she said once. "It ends because it's finished its work. It teaches you something, and then it lets you go." She learned that love can't survive on devotion alone. It needs communication, respect, and safety. And fame quietly steals all three while pretending to give everything. She admitted she had spent too many years protecting an image. The perfect wife, the perfect family, when what she needed most was truth. The betrayal wasn't a person, as she once explained. It was realizing how much I'd silenced myself to keep peace. At 58, she began choosing peace that didn't require her to disappear. She returned to acting, not as escape, but as expression. Her performances grew deeper, stripped of pretense, almost spiritual. Every character she played carried shades of her journey. Grief, endurance, rebirth. Keith, too, found sobriety again. He spent time alone, practicing what he called the art of stillness. He no longer filled every silence with sound. He started gardening on his Nashville property, writing songs without deadlines, and reconnecting with his daughters. At one concert, his voice broke as he said to the crowd, "You can lose the love of your life and still love her every day." Then he sang "God Whispered Your Name." And halfway through, his voice cracked again. The audience went silent, not out of pity, but respect. They say some bonds are too deep for divorce to dissolve. That might be true for them. They don't talk often now, but there's no bitterness, no sharpness. When they meet at their daughter's events, they smile. Not forced, but gentle. Like two people who've walked through fire, and now understand both its warmth and its danger. Their story was never about perfection. It was about courage, the courage to try, to forgive, to let go without hate. Nicole once wrote in her journal, "Love didn't fail. It just finished teaching us what we needed to learn." Maybe that's all love ever is. A lesson written in the language of the heart, fading only when it's understood. Keith Urban's final admission at 57 wasn't an apology, but an acknowledgement. Sometimes the hardest part of love is knowing when to stop fighting it and start honoring it for what it was. Their marriage didn't die in disgrace. It ended in understanding. And though the world saw an ending, they knew it was something quieter, a transformation. Because what love couldn't fix, time eventually healed. When the noise faded and the world stopped asking questions, what remained was silence. The kind that no longer hurts, but hums softly with memory. Nicole Kidman wakes before dawn these days. She walks barefoot through the garden of her Nashville home. Dew brushing her feet, the air rich with lavender and earth. In that still hour before her daughters wake, she listens to the birds, the wind, the quiet she once feared. For years, silence meant loss. Now, it feels like peace. Sunday and faith have grown into her anchors. Young women with their mother's grace and their father's restless curiosity. Sunday plays piano. Faith paints. Sometimes when they laugh together in the kitchen, Nicole pauses to watch them, a faint smile curving her lips. "They are the best parts of both of us," as she once told her sister. She doesn't speak of Keith often, but when his songs play on the radio, she doesn't change the station. She lets the music fill the room, her hands still around her morning coffee. There's no bitterness now, only gratitude. Gratitude for the years that shaped her, for the man who once stood beside her, for the family they built, and for the lessons they left in each other's hearts. Keith Urban, too, has found his rhythm again. The stages are smaller now, fewer lights, fewer cities. But his performances feel more intimate, more honest. His voice, once made for stadiums, now trembles with something deeper. He plays not to impress, but to remember. "There are songs you sing to be heard," he once told an audience. "And songs you sing because they're all that's left to say." He never names Nicole. He doesn't need to. She's there in every pause between chords, in every lyric about forgiveness, in every quiet moment when he closes his eyes and lets the music ache. The world still whispers about them, the couple that almost lasted forever. But neither of them lives in that story anymore. They've stepped beyond it, into something gentler. They are not lovers. They are not enemies. They are two souls who met at the right time, loved fiercely, and learned when to let go. They still meet sometimes, at their daughters' graduations, birthdays, family gatherings. Their smiles are warm, their laughter easy. He still calls her Nick. She still calls him darling. It isn't nostalgia. It's recognition. The quiet respect of two travelers who shared the same road and reached the end with grace instead of regret. After one graduation ceremony, Nicole lingered on the lawn as the crowd thinned. The air was golden, heavy with summer. Keith approached, hands in his pockets, that same familiar tilt in his smile. They stood side by side, watching their daughters laugh in the distance. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to explain. Finally, Keith said softly, "We did good, didn't we?" Nicole nodded, eyes glistening. "We did," she whispered. "We really did." Then they smiled. Two souls who had once shared everything, now at peace with what remained. Later that night, Nicole wrote in her journal, "There are loves that burn bright and end in ashes. And there are loves that become air, unseen, but everywhere." Miles away, Keith sat by his window, a guitar resting on his knee. He hummed the outline of a new song. He didn't know its title yet, but its first line was already clear. She was the sound before the silence. And perhaps that's what remains after forever. Not possession, not pain, but music. The echo of something once beautiful, still vibrating in the heart long after the curtain falls. Because love, in its truest form, never vanishes. It transforms into memory, into melody, into the quiet promise that for a time, perhaps the most important time, it was real. And if you close your eyes long enough, you can still hear it. The sound of two hearts that once beat as one, whispering across the distance. We loved, and that was enough.